It will go down as a memorable midterm election. Democrats take the House, Republicans add to their lead in the Senate, and the race to become Georgia's next governor continues on and on and on. Joining me right now, the moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. Chuck, here we are. Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp, they are still going back and forth. It is hard to tell when this all will end.
Honestly, Jeff, I don't know if we're going to, even when it ends, I don't think half the state is going to feel as if it was a legitimate ending. It's a toxic stew of political polarization, and I think it's just going to be the prelude to a very divisive 2020.
I was reading something in The Atlantic earlier today from a professor of African-American history over at Emory University here in Atlanta, and she essentially, her charge against Brian Kemp of it being unfair, that he should not have retained his Secretary of State job. Is that the national take on this?
I think it's not just with Brian Kemp. I think it's also, for instance, in Broward County, Florida, the supervisor of elections is a partisan elected official. The idea that we have elected officials who are partisans, who are supposed to be impartial in the overseeing of elections, it's just, in this day and age, I just think we just don't have that trust on the other side of the aisle with each other anymore. I think you're going to see more movements towards finding a way to at least departisanize the oversight of elections, whether on the county level or statewide level.
You know, one of the interesting races around the country was here in Atlanta, the 6th District. Karen Handel had held off John Ossoff a year and a half ago in what was the most expensive House race in the history of the United States. And then here we are, Lucy McBath, who was little heralded. I think that surprised a lot of people, not only in that district, but I think around the state as well.
Well, I think, first of all, it was a reminder that the nationalization of that race may have actually benefited Handel at the time. And I think the Democrats are becoming a metropolitan party of urban and suburban voters, while the Republicans are solidifying their hold in rural and exurban communities. And I think that's why you have a Georgia governor's race that is as close as it is, because Georgia is one of those states that's almost equally divided between metropolitan and rural exurban.
Chuck Todd, Meet the Press, Sunday right here on 11Alive. Chuck, thanks.